and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the June 16th meeting of the Knox County Audit Committee. We'll start with the roll call.
Matthew Warren.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Jay.
Here.
Jim Morrison.
Here.
Commissioner Russell. Here. 5 members are present.
Sure. Russell, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
We don't really have a flag.
Yeah, we don't have a flag. So.
You know, you have a flag on your uniform?
Oh, there is one right here.
Here we go. All right. There you go. You're a flag.
Salute the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, I believe everybody should have received a copy of the minutes from our prior meeting. Is there a motion to approve them?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It passes. With that, we'll keep working down the agenda. I think the first thing we have will be the external audit update from Ted. I believe he's going to go through the governance audit.
Correct. You should have a 4-page letter. I want to make sure everyone received that first. Okay. And basically, we have a required communication letter that goes to the governing body. In this case, it's the Audit Committee that it's sent out at the beginning of the engagement, and we also have one that is sent out at the end of an engagement. This is one that's at basically the beginning of the engagement. Since it's at the beginning, it's kind of more of like a planning and what we're in general overall. It's not going to be any audit findings or anything like that because we haven't started the audit, but it does go over some important communication matters. In the very beginning of this page, on page 1 is the communication section, and it stresses the importance of two-way communication between the auditing firm and governance, in this case, the Audit Committee. It also goes over our responsibility to communicate fraud, which we will do if we see any, and also discuss at the bottom of the page, start shared responsibilities for independence, because independence is really important in an audit. And beginning on the second page, it goes over what responsibilities are for the external auditor and as well for the county. And basically, right underneath that discusses our internal independence policies and procedures that are in accordance with the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and also stresses the importance of not having business or family relationships with those related to the county. Then it goes on to talk about the bottom of page 2, the audit planning process, and we have started the audit. We started in May. We're wrapping up, I believe this week's our last week of our preliminary phase, and then in the fall we will come back and do our primary phase of testing. But in the interim phase, the importance, we're trying to understand how the county operates, looking at internal controls. We might look at certain transactions like fixed assets, capital assets, or do some of our grant testing but early on. But we're basically at the beginning of the stage of our audit, and we're still in our planning stage, and we will continue looking at planning or just we might make any changes to our audit when we go to our final stage of the audit when we begin in September.
Can you talk about the things that are covered in the audit? Like, are you covering all of Knox County in general, including all departments, separate elected offices, the school system, everything, or just?
That's a good question. We are responsible for all of Knox County. That would mean we're responsible for the county government, we're responsible for the fee offices, and we're responsible for Knox County schools as well. And we do a separate audit for the internal school funds for Knox County schools, and we also do a separate audit for the Knox County Pension Board, which is reported separately to their board, And we also do independent audits for like Emergency Communications District, GIS, in the Planning Commission, and a couple other smaller entities.
And the fee offices are included in the overall audit?
The fee offices are included in the Knox County government, yes. In our planning stage, which is this stage here, we will begin our testing of those and we'll complete it. That's one of the things we get started with or continue on and do earlier in the engagement because they're a little more cash driven as opposed to balance sheet, as opposed to more cash driven than anything else. So that they're a little easier to test early on. They don't have complicated balance sheet adjustments to those offices. But they are included. Yes.
Last year during your audit presentation, there was some credit card fraud, not perpetrated by anybody here, but, it was mostly due to lack of some internal control improvements. Will you be testing that and how our P cards are handled?
Yes, as part of our audit, we go through a risk assessment process that's really ever evolving, and any issue or any finding that we have in the prior year, we're required to follow up on that in the subsequent year. So we will follow up on and report on that. There's a section in each audit report when you have an audit finding, the next year you have to basically summarize and address whether the prior audit finding has been resolved or not. Or if not, it continues as a finding in the current audit year. So yes, we will address that. And we will address all the other audit findings that we had a year ago. And the same thing goes with the independent report that we had for the internal school funds. On page 3, it does discuss the concept of materiality and planning and executing the audit. And while we say we do audit all the fee offices, the county, the schools, but obviously it is impossible to test every transaction. So we do test on a sample basis. But we do look at every single fee office kind of as a separate audit and test it accordingly, and test Knox County government. And we will evaluate all departments. We would do detailed testing in selected departments, kind of on a rotation basis. And particularly for offices that are off-site from the city-county building, we will, on a random basis, rotating basis, we will select certain transactions and test accordingly. Next caption, significant risks of material misstatement. And there are 2 significant risks from a global perspective, being fraudulent revenue recognition and management override controls. Those 2 areas kind of trigger what could be issues in any area, because if either of them are breached, then you can have a significant audit issue. So we do evaluate those 2 global concepts as we're doing an audit. And if we see issues in one of those areas, like we're not satisfied with the control structure in place, then we will concentrate heavier testing, look into that area.
Are there any changes that have occurred since last year, maybe in some of the management controls or whatever, that would change, that would alter a little bit of your planning and more focus on anything that's changed? Or I guess I'd even ask that about internal controls, and if you see anything of those, because I know you probably steer some of those our way or Chris's to somebody if you have concerns about anything. If anything's risen since your last audit.
Nothing substantial at this point. There's always a few little things that we're looking into, but they're just questions at this point, and we will evaluate them as we go through the audit. But nothing in primary Knox County government that we're aware of.
With the youth center, the issue that's come up here recently, and is it going to report to the sheriff's office or what? And I'm not getting into that issue as much. But would something like that call? I don't know how they were covered in your audit and in which department, and if it changes departments, to report somewhere else. And again, that's more your all's issue to deal with.
We haven't, I don't think he would even hit there yet because we haven't yet made a decision, so.
Right.
Until it goes through our process, it would probably be something they would look at next year. So it's a question way too far ahead of the world right now.
But with that said, it does, just skipping forward to the bottom of the page, we use the work of internal auditors. We communicate with Zach's department, and we know what they are looking at and some of their concerns are. And he knows what some of the issues that we've come across during the course of our audit as well. We occasionally get inquiries from the state of Tennessee Comptroller's office that we're required to evaluate. So a lot of different factors. Kind of goes back to the very beginning of this letter. Communication with all parties, whether it's the audit committee, whether it's internal audit, all the state of Tennessee, talking with the mayor's office, talking with the fee offices is critical to learn information, and that we adjust what we're going to test as we go along because of that. Our approach to internal control and compliance relevant to the audit, the third item on this page, basically we are required to evaluate internal controls. That is part of an audit, a governmental audit or auditing in accordance with government auditing standards. It's also required by single audit standards, which are also known as uniform guidance. So we do evaluate controls, and if there's something we need to report on, we will report on them. We look at it both from a financial statement perspective, and we also look at it from a grant perspective, federal grant perspective, particularly federal grant perspective, particularly ones that we identify as a major program during our testing. And we also issue a report in the compliance section on laws and regulations, anything we're aware of or issues with internal controls that we're aware of. I talked about internal auditors. And again, we do regularly communicate with Zach and his department. Timing of the audit, kind of talked about a little bit earlier at the top of the last page. We've started our interim work, and in September we'll start our primary field work stage, and that normally goes into November and possibly into December, and then we're in the report wrap-up stage.
You expect it, I think, isn't that February is our timeline usually for a meeting?
February, early March.
Yeah, is that, you expect to report on that by then?
We are aiming for December 31st. That is our goal, to have at least the ACFR done. It's sometimes or often it for one reason or another. This is a huge entity. A lot of if there's a broken part somewhere, or I say an area that is slow in getting records together, because there's a lot of different facets to it, then sometimes it often pushes to January 31st. But we are still planning in conjunction with the finance department to be able to issue the ACFR report by December 31st at this stage. I would think January 31st would be the latest. The compliance report normally follows a few weeks after that, because we have the responsibility to get financial report information off to both for certificate reasons, but also for the state for and bond agencies. So we try to beat that first before we get into the compliance reporting and all the communications required with that. Because when findings do pop up, we will discuss them or potential findings, I should say, do pop up during our work. We will discuss them with all parties. So no one should be blindsided that there's a finding at the end of the job. We want to make sure that we understand all the facets, what they've gone through and their perspective before we have anything in writing.
Do you need a vote on this governance letter, or is this just for our information?
I believe it's for information.
I don't know if we needed to accept it.
It normally is for information at this point.
I think we voted on it.
Yeah, we voted on the auditor before. I just didn't know if you needed an action.
I think it's relevant just to note in the minutes that it's been discussed.
Absolutely. And just to be sure, I think this speaks a little bit to Jim's question, but knowing you guys have gone through the a lot of the preliminary field work now. There's nothing that you've been aware of that needs to be communicated to the committee from a
Not this point. Correct.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Ted.
And I'll add that the Knox internal school funds audit is also underway.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ted.
Does this go to the commission, the discussion on the governance letter, do you present it to the commission also? Okay.
We're good on that item. We'll move to the next one. I believe this is going to be the Knox County Sheriff's Office Fleet Management Audit. This has been led by internal audit. I think Harrison and Nathan are presenting.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our report on the KCSO fleet. I would like to start by thanking KCSO for y'all's cooperation. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedules to assist us with this. While we did find some areas of improvement and some potential risk areas, we did not find any substantial evidence of fraud, waste, or abuse by KCSO fleet. A little background on why we did the audit. This audit was the final in a trio of engagements that internal audit has been working on for the past year. We set out to perform audits on all three of the major fleets within the Knox County government. Started with Knox County general government fleet, then moved into KCS fleet, and finished with KCSO. Between all three fleets, Knox County government fields over 1,000 vehicles, with KCSO's fleet accounting for about half of that. The full breakdown can be found in Figure 2 on page 1 of the audit report. Each of the three fleets operates under a different command structure with different departmental rules and responsibilities. KCSO fleet's main body of rules and responsibilities are found in the Sheriff's Office General Orders. And operation of the fleet is a shared responsibility with not only fleet management but illicit internal partners, which can be found in Figure 3 on page 2 of the audit report. KCSO's fleet management, primarily comprised by Chief Amber and Lieutenant Heck. They take on the overall responsibility for the operation of KCSO's fleet, with admin support from KCSO Finance, KCSO HR, Knox County Finance, and the Knox County Fleet Service Center, along with Knox County Risk Management, providing assistance regarding accidents involving county vehicles, alongside KCSO's IT department providing technological support. Figure 4 on page 3 of the report provides a breakdown of the digital systems utilized to support KCSO's fleet operations. Main system, Tailor-Built Records Management System, RMS. This is a records management platform implemented across the Sheriff's Office, which is currently being utilized to track individual vehicles, and we'll dig into that a little more further on. The objective of the audit was to determine if program participants are adhering to the requirements laid out in the KCSO General Orders, to include drivers, those charged with oversight and governance, alongside maintenance and administrative personnel. And our scope was all KCSO vehicles and program participants from November 15th, 2023 to November 15th of 2024.
All right, so I'm gonna get us into a little bit of what we concluded on.
Transition, just to make sure we have it for the record. Could you go ahead and state name and address for the record? For both of you. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, my name is Harrison Lewis, internal audit.
I didn't get it on the front.
Nathan Wallace, internal audit. So moving into our conclusions, those can be found on page 4 of the audit, and they will generally lead into our findings. So starting out, first, is KCSO compliant with safety and eligibility requirements as outlined in general orders, and are fleet-related expectations sufficiently documented to ensure that KCSO drivers are operating vehicles in a safe, secure, and uniform manner? Generally, yes. General orders regarding safety and eligibility of drivers to operate a vehicle are being followed. However, these rules are broad in scope. This is by design because the general orders are meant to kind of be a general operating procedure. So with that in mind, a lot of processes that are used to operate a fleet are not formally written down. And we'll kind of get more into that on finding 1. Second, are KCSO vehicles maintained in a timely manner in accordance with established maintenance schedules? Generally, no. We will go into greater detail there on finding 2 regarding this issue, but the long and short of it is that 52% of the maintenance visits sampled did not make it into the shop on time or within their mileage limit. That was set out in the general orders. And we'll dive deeper into that in finding 2. So third, we looked at if taxable benefits are being appropriately applied to all KCSO personnel who receive a fringe benefit via the use of a take-home vehicle. Generally, we found this wasn't happening, but this gets into very specialized tax regulations, and generally the majority of KCSO officers who use their vehicles are exempt to having this benefit to apply to their paycheck. There's a small number of non-uniformed civilian drivers who essentially drive take-home vehicles that are issued by the department, and they may need to look into having this benefit applied. We'll go over this in more detail in finding 3, but it is important to note that across all 3 of our fleet audits, that's KCS, Knox County General Government, and KCSO, we found this issue to exist across the whole fleet. All right, now 4th, are KCSO vehicles appropriately tracked to ensure adequate asset accountability? Generally, yes. We had asked KCSO to muster several vehicles for us to physically inspect them. So we actually went out and physically inspected these vehicles, and they were able to provide these vehicles for us in a timely manner. However, during this portion of the testing, we identified some potential risk areas surrounding the capital asset list that's maintained by Knox County Finance that we will address further in finding 4. So finally, the last conclusion, we looked at whether KCSO-related vehicle accidents are processed and documented appropriately. The answer to this was a yes. The officers generally are adhering to the procedural guidelines for accidents involving agency-owned vehicles, and we really didn't find any issues there. Now, I'll let Mr. Lewis explain more about what we tested.
So there were 4 main categories that we were looking to test when we began this audit. The first being safety and eligibility, second is accident response, third is maintenance, and the 4th is asset accountability. First, regarding safety and eligibility, we identified an issue regarding the lack of clear and detailed policies and procedures regarding KCSO fleet operations, including a lack of safe driver training for civilian drivers, that is to say civilians who have been issued a county vehicle. This can be seen in finding 1 on page 8 of the audit report. During our review, while we found that they had a few general orders, there was not a dedicated fleet safety manual like we'd seen in other areas of the county. Figure 7 on page 8 illustrates our benchmarking results across the 3 fleet audits. You can see Knox County and KCS both have a dedicated fleet safety program, while KCSO does not. We split out KCSO civilians and KCSO officers because during the audit, we noticed that KCSO officers receive a significant amount of training related to their position as certified peace officers. Therefore, we didn't want to issue a recommendation for them to receive additional training on top of their post-certification training, post being peace officer standards and training. This is a standard training the majority of law enforcement officers receive prior to stepping into their role. It's comprehensive and well administered, and they receive it as part of their academy as well as annual in-service training. Where the gap arises is the small number of civilian drivers present in the KCSO fleet. These drivers are not currently required to complete a driver training course administered by the department. It's our belief that developing and utilizing a program manual will help to close those gaps between the training received by uniformed officers and civilians related to vehicle usage. We found a number of other non-formalized activities completed as part of maintaining the KCSO fleet, which we also believe would benefit from having a formal manual to detail the process. This list is on page 9, and they include routine activities such as maintenance and inspections, as well as reporting requirements, driver conduct, and the administration function behind asset tracking. Our recommendation is just to have each process formally documented, and that's the purpose that a dedicated fleet manual would serve. KCSO Fleet Management have concurred with this finding and indicated that they'll work towards developing a comprehensive fleet operations manual, which would include a safe driver training program for their civilian drivers.
So, were you going on to finding two?
I was going to let Mr. Wallace take finding two.
Can we stop on finding one for just a second? I was just going to ask, I see that note in the report about defining the civilian driver, but what types of roles are those and the reason for the vehicle?
We found that they were largely administrative roles for employees who were on 24-hour on-call status. So, say like an IT personnel, if they were needed after hours and needed a reliable method of getting to and from either the city county building or to an officer who is in need of their services. Am I on the right track with that, Chief Amron?
There's 24 out of the 500.
Right. 24 civilian.
Civilian personnel who are assigned a vehicle from the
Is
department.
there a breakdown of those in this report?
We have a list of those drivers that was provided to us by KCSO.
Can you send that to the audit committee?
Of course.
Did any of those seem inappropriate for their positions or appropriate? Or do you look into that?
Based on our judgment and conversations with KCSO, we didn't see anyone that we couldn't explain why they were given a vehicle or didn't understand why they had one.
Okay.
So these would include take-home.
Yes, sir.
I know that'll come into play in a minute with the IRS ones as well,
Right.
regarding to the civilians. It's helpful to understand who that population is.
Right. And it is a pretty minimal section of their employees, but it was something that we looked into.
Any other questions on the first finding?
Oh, you can take finding two, fortunately.
All right, so moving into finding two, we identified an issue regarding a lack of timely preventative maintenance for KCSO vehicles. That's on page 11. So to paint a picture of how the maintenance is supposed to work per the general orders, the officer is supposed to take their vehicle into a Jiffy Lube location every 3 months or every 5,000 miles for an oil change. This oil change includes a 23-point comprehensive inspection of the vehicle's key systems and components. So as it's written in the general orders, it is a great preventive control against the risk of vehicle failure due to a lack of maintenance. However, when we pulled the Jiffy Lube invoices for our sample of 27 vehicles, we found that these maintenance visits weren't necessarily occurring in the necessary time frame. For our testing, we added in kind of a buffer zone. We did this for both KCS and Knox County General Government as well. But it was in a buffer zone of an additional 1,000 miles and an additional 30 days to account for actually getting the vehicle into service. And also to account for the needs of law enforcement, kind of outweighing the needs of timely oil change. But even after that buffer, we found that for the 63 maintenance visits that we covered, 33 of those occurred after the buffer zone. So it should be noted that again, this was a buffer zone we added for KCS and Knox County General Government, so we're trying to stay standard across. And what we recommend is that something that KCSO is pretty much already doing is further build out their RMS to make it easier for maintenance to track maintenance compliance. Even during the audit, they showed us they're making some pretty great strides towards getting RMS up to where they want it to be. And we have confidence that when we come back to check up in a year from now, this won't be an issue. Now, KCSO does concur with the recommendation to continue to build and utilize the RMS system to help make their maintenance tracking more effective and efficient. Now, any questions, I'll pass to Mr. Lewis to cover our third finding.
So we use Jiffy Lube exclusively?
Yes, there's a contract through Jiffy Lube, and they kind of have a whole portal set up, and it's pretty well serviced.
For routine maintenance, for tires, I believe there's a contract with a separate vendor, and any kind of specialized maintenance will typically go to a specialized vendor as well.
My only question was, does Jiffy Lube have some sort of text messaging or some sort of computerized system that sends emails or alerts and says, hey, it's been, 45 days past your date or anything?
I don't know if that was something that we looked into during the course of this or not.
I think hopefully the new database that we're working on
will also correct some of those things. We started in early 24 when we noticed some inconsistencies that we wanted to address. So when we designed the new RMS system, we got input into what to do with a fleet management, basically without going out and buying $100,000 software to do it. So in this new one, we took advantage of that and got to be in on the ground floor and built the module so it would assist us in being able to track all these things. So that all that information, since we got online with that, started working the bugs out of it at the beginning of 25, we've just been working on building those modules. And as you can imagine, with 500 vehicles, that's a lot of data entry by one administrative assistant that's entering it all. And that will allow us to see those things better.
We did kind of get a glimpse of Jiffy Lube's internal system when they sent invoices to us. That may be something that they'd be willing to do or have the capability of doing, sending reminders. Their system seemed to be pretty robust. So between that and your all's RMS system, that should kind of.
I was thinking if I was running the business, you're dropping the ball because you are missing out on income.
Right.
Yeah.
Who actually in the policy maintains responsibility for ensuring the maintenance is performed? Is there maintenance staff that's tasked with?
It kind of comes between the fleet maintenance staff and the officer to make sure the vehicles are running properly. Am I right in that, Chief Amber?
And one thing that we're looking at that this kind of brought the discussion up is it's very hard, and it was in our general order that said 3 months or 5,000 miles, but that doesn't always work in law enforcement. I'm looking into maybe starting with an hours, ever so many hours now, because the discrepancy that brings apart is with the rotating shifts, the patrolman's time off, extra jobs, all these other things that are factored into that, then it's easy to get outside of that limit. Myself and Lieutenant Heck will usually be the first to know if somebody has abused it to the point that it's caused a failure, and then we address that accordingly with each individual if there is one. And those have been very, very few and far between.
I think as you review that, also consider that I'm fairly certain that standard of 3 months or X number of miles was something based on a 20-year ago study,
right.
And most vehicles, it's also a great way to continue to do more oil changes. But I mean, I think it was based on a 70s or 80s standard of a modern engine.
It was up to at least 2,000. Now they use full synthetic.
It's
So
5,000.
full synthetic now is 10,000 miles.
I just don't think it needs to happen as much as we think that it needs to happen in a realistic sense, but you need to consult somebody who knows more about that.
To a civilian, they recommend 10,000 miles on a fully synthetic vehicle now.
Yeah.
So that's why oil changes 120, 150.
So as you're adjusting, it might be a good opportunity to find out, is that really the right policy?
We came up with the 5 to 6 because of the excessive idling hours and everything of our police vehicles. It's consistent with our type of business.
Any other questions on finding 2?
Knox, we'll move on to finding 3.
All right, finding 3, this one will move into the issue that we discovered via a taxable fringe benefit not being appropriately applied to the KCSO civilian employees with assigned take-home vehicles. And this is found in finding 3 on page 13. And the reason this came up is that when an employee is the recipient of a fringe, that is to say non-salary benefit, a benefit must generally be included in the employee's gross income, which would be subject to income tax withholding and employment taxes. The use of a department vehicle for the purposes of commuting and other de minimis use, to our understanding of the IRS code, would seem to constitute a non-salary benefit. There's exceptions to this rule, though, a major exception being that for patrol officers, they're excluded from this requirement since the official use of a marked patrol vehicle is considered to be a working condition benefit. For this exception, we refer to IRS publication 15-B, Employer's Tax Guide to Fringe Benefits, page 23. A working condition benefit applies to KCSO patrol officers, as all of the employees' use of a qualified non-personal vehicle is a working condition benefit. For the KCSO civilian employees who have assigned vehicles, we could not identify an applicable exemption to the fringe benefit regulations based on the nature of their vehicle use. And we obtained supporting documentation via payroll reports to validate application of the taxable benefit for each of those civilian employees. After running that payroll report, we found that out of the 24 civilian drivers, only 2 are currently having this benefit properly applied to their paychecks during our scope period. We didn't find any evidence of intentional misapplication of this benefit. Our judgment was that it was likely due to the complexity of the IRS regulations regarding associated exemptions, along with the department already being familiar with exemptions for uniformed officers. But regardless of that, the oversight could lead to incorrect wage and tax statements for the majority of KCSO civilian employees who have take-home vehicles currently. It should be noted that the tax implication is minimal. However, closer attention is likely warranted to ensure KCSO's proper compliance with those
I have a question on that. If it looks like in their response they're asking for some clarification on the code, and I don't know if that comes from the law department or if that comes from who the authority would be to give that clarification. But let's assume they get the clarification that yes, everybody that this is a civilian or a certain classification has a take-home vehicle that's supposed to be taxed based on the use of that vehicle.
Right.
Are they meant to retroactively put that in place back to when that person got the vehicle, or begin upon date X, in the next fiscal year?
I believe our recommendation was just moving forward to contact payroll and have it updated. We weren't sure if it'd be overly cumbersome based on, the difference to have it retroactively applied, but that may be worth looking further into. The difference is slight. I don't remember the exact numbers when we looked at the payroll reports, but certainly moving forward, if it is deemed to be applicable. Then.
But I guess my question is a follow-up question would be, if they knew they were supposed to have been doing it and hadn't,
right? That's
less of a free pass.
No, I understand
if they
that.
didn't know and need to go forward. To me, if the agency just didn't want to do it and they didn't want to turn in timesheets and cards and get billed for it for the last 2 years that they had the card, then that's a one path versus.
Right, I understand that. Based on our conversations, it didn't seem like something that was known about and willfully ignored. There was a lack of knowledge that it was there for those employees.
And this was an issue across all 3 audits. So we're finding this to be kind of an overarching issue of kind of niche tax exemption that's not being applied across the entirety of the county, not just KCSO.
Is this something, I'm sorry to do this, but is this something finance? Like, have you guys thought through this?
Yeah, I think we can send something out from payroll. It's kind of, it's really on the employee to report it to payroll so they can take the deduction. That's something that we can send out and do a reminder on. Because it's really...
Why is it on the employee?
It's a fringe benefit, right? And so ultimately they're getting a benefit that not all employees get. And so if you're getting that, then you're supposed to report that to the IRS, and we do it in the form of taking it as a deduction instead of them reporting it themselves. I think it's like $1.50 per trip. Does that seem?
It's pretty small. Like it's not a big deduction.
I think it's $1.50
for us.
per
It's
trip.
the coming to the determination. When you read the tax law, as all tax law, it's very complicated, and they don't do a very good job separating out when it comes to law enforcement or first responders. They talk about first responders and they talk about marked units, and they basically say if you drive a marked unit, you're excluded. You don't have to worry about it. They really don't address for a law enforcement person that is on call 24/7 for whatever their job is in the law enforcement field. And that's what our council was looking at to advise the sheriff on whether or not that can be determined accurately.
Something similar happened in Hamilton County a couple of years ago. I read it in my CPA journal. Is that they had an auditor come and say, hey, all emergency vehicles are personal, use, and we're going to get taxed. Then they ended up having a problem that they said, hey, these are all going to be personally taxed. So all their police officers, instead of driving the cars home, just said, well, I'll just park them, and then there wasn't adequate parking. And then sheriff's vehicles were getting towed because they were parking them illegally downtown. So it's complicated. I get it. It's easy to fall astray of these rules. But I would also look at, hey, for whoever's taking these cars home, more than likely, I have a feeling they're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to drive my own car in, make sure we have parking for them. So,
Yeah, I would just encourage as we sort of dig into this, and even with the finance and payroll, it should be seen to be a fairly easy system on the front end to say if you are going to have a take-home vehicle, that there is a policy in place for that take-home vehicle, and you're acknowledging
Right.
the fringe benefit and the taxable income, and then how that's reported is one thing, but you can't not pay your taxes on things.
Right. And I believe you guys are going to have your in-house counsel kind of look into that further, because this is based off our understanding of the code. There may be some exemption somewhere for civilian law enforcement personnel. We couldn't find that, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. But if it does, then our recommendation is that it needs to be applied moving forward.
Have you considered consulting a tax accountant? I mean, it seems to me that it's fairly important that we stay clear of the IRS.
That's why our recommendation was to have KCSO look into it, because they do have
In-house legal counsel.
that
They
can
have
provide
a
legal
tax
advice.
counsel. Legal counsel is different than tax.
Tax.
Yeah, it's their fault if they
So-
step out and get that.
You have a tax, our auditor is a tax firm.
Well, in speaking to the auditors, they're not any clearer than we are. That's the whole point. And I'm not saying that's not a bad idea, maybe go and
Approach
that's
a
not a
CPA.
slight to you guys, but in discussing it with them, they felt as frustrated like we were also. The language is not there in what we're reading.
I'm just a little concerned about potential liability should someone be audited by the IRS, and then we were supposed to be taking payroll taxes out on them and we weren't.
How did the two that did report correctly get set up initially? It seems odd that two.
So we had ran a report and found just out of the blue those two had actually made that deduction. So it was our deduction that they had reached out to payroll directly, because we hadn't heard anything of people actually taking that deduction yet.
Just seems odd if the policy is unclear that you have a couple that proactively reached out and 22 that have not over time. So there was never a formal process in place that you guys are aware of that made those two reach out.
No.
Not that we saw.
No, we're being formal process, but it does lead back into our recommendation to create that formal process for the fleet manual.
are they allowed to take these trips on vacation?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Their work vehicles, so the general county, they'll use what's called the commuter rule. So it's your commute times, it's a formula that you punch in, your commute times some multiplier that gives you the amount. A lot of the amounts per quarter that we're taking deductions are like $100. So the max that we can be off would be, $400 or $500.
By the way, the IRS can create it, right? Or says the employer is responsible for determining the value of the fringe benefit.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, I think it's got to be reported by the individual based off of what the employer tells them. So this is as a CPA that doesn't do taxes, but it's not.
We have a lot of accounting nerds in here.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions regarding this finding?
We're good to proceed.
All right, so moving into finding 4. So finding 4 is found on page 14. And we identified an issue regarding the accuracy and completeness of the Knox County Finances capital asset list. So this finding kind of needs a little background. To start, KCSO keeps an updated list of all of their vehicles that are under their purview. This list showed 531 active vehicles whenever they provided it to us at the beginning of the audit. Also, at the beginning of the audit, they were in the early stages of a transition into RMS. So we kind of caught them at a bad time, but they were still able to provide a pretty complete list of their 531 active vehicles. Throughout our testing, we found a few vehicles which had already been sent to surplus that were still marked as active on KCSO's list. However, when we did our dedicated asset accountability testing and asked them to muster a sample of vehicles based on that list, they were able to pull up every single vehicle requested. So there's no issue of them being able to get a vehicle out there. That's kind of done. So we believe that the 531 on the KCSO list is a generally accurate accounting of their fleet assets. But in those few leftover vehicles we found were kind of a small outlier within a reasonable margin of error for a transitioning tracking list. So currently, KCSO is working to standardize and digitize that list through RMS, and we recommend they continue doing so. Now, Knox County Finance also keeps a list of capital assets. Capital assets are assets worth over a certain amount that finance tracks for tax purposes. Finance keeps track of not only KCSO's capital assets, which would include their vehicles, but every capital asset owned by Knox County. I don't really want to get into the weeds on the county capitalization policy in this audit, but the end result is that there are two lists of KCSO vehicles, one managed by KCSO and one managed by finance. We found there to be a significant discrepancy between those lists. Figure 9 on page 14 kind of visualizes that difference. The list of active vehicles tracked by finance is much larger than the list of active vehicles tracked by KCSO. Internal audit performed some pretty extensive testing between these two lists and found that on the capital asset list, there were instances of vehicles lacking a make and model, instances of vehicles with identical vehicle identification numbers with VINs, and these identical VIN numbers have different make and model numbers. So there's some issue with data integrity. But the consistency evidenced to us that there may be an issue of communication between finance and KCSO fleet, and we recommend working on building out some better channels of communication between these two departments to ensure accurate reporting of vehicle assets and to dedicate some time to reconcile the capital asset list as it pertains to KCSO's fleet. Now, both KCSO and Knox County Finance have concurred with this recommendation to communicate regarding the capital asset list. And I'll open the floor to any questions. Ending none, we can go on to our opportunities for improvement.
I've got a question for more finance directed, but does that impact the way you guys are calculating depreciation, anything like that that's coming off of an asset list?
I think ultimately for us, as we build like capital asset lists over the years, we just we gather the information that's available. I think the majority of the items that are over the amount that what Chief Amber has are fully depreciated assets that we've not disposed of. And I think working with him, we can come up with, we can reduce our total list, but from a financial statement impact, it's probably like not hardly anything, because they're all fully depreciated.
That's helpful. Any other questions on that finding?
We'll move on to the opportunities for improvement. Opportunities for improvement, or OFIs, they're just suggested improvements that do not require a management response. So our first opportunity for improvement, we believe that GPS tracking for KCSO vehicles could strengthen the control environment. So during our audit and our discussions with KCSO Fleet Management, they let us know that there's no dedicated vehicle GPS tracking. Now, this does not mean KCSO does not have controls in place for tracking their vehicle locations. For officers, the body camera and the phone are both GPS tracked. KCSO IT can pull that pretty quick. For civilian drivers, the controls are slightly lesser because they can only track their county-issued phone, but the controls exist. They just aren't directly attached to the vehicle itself. It's attached to the person driving the vehicle. So this does open up a risk of personal use of county vehicle assets, which we would like to mitigate when possible. In audit, we try to benchmark our criteria against comparable organizations. With that in mind, we did find on KCS and Knox County General Government that both of them did GPS tag their vehicles. However, it should also be noted that KCSO has the largest fleet in the county. So GPS tracking over 500 vehicles is no small order, especially when other controls are in place that mitigate that risk. The second branch to this opportunity for improvement, in conversations with Knox County Emergency Communications personnel, it was noted that GPS was used by other emergency personnel within Knox County, and KCSO was a bit of a noticeable outlier by not having it. We feel having a dedicated GPS would be kind of a powerful control to ensure that we have kind of positive identification of KCSO vehicle assets wherever they go. This decreases the risk of asset loss, employee personal use of county vehicles, and the risk of communication breakdown between KCSO and any partner agencies. But since this is an opportunity for improvement and not a finding, no measured response was needed for this one. And pending any questions, we can go on to our second opportunity for improvement.
Did you guys do anything to reconcile at least like total mileage with particularly those civilian vehicles to make sure it's matching roughly what you would expect over a 36 month period?
So the difference
In our continuous auditing.
So the kind of the separation here is that with the GPS tracking that you find with, say, the county general government, we can do that. That function doesn't exist for what we have access to within KCSO's IT. So they're tracking GPS locations of the assets on the person, so it's not necessarily tracking the trips or the mileage.
Right, but I guess the question's more, if the car was driven 5,000 miles over 6 months, is that reasonable based on their?
So we did not do any testing for odometers based on, we didn't do any odometer testing based on how long they've had the vehicle.
Is there a reason?
I'll throw this out to you for that. So every month, we get a report from each individual shift that puts the mileage, their last oil change, the tab number of the vehicle that they are driving. From doing this so many years, I can basically tell you the average miles that a patrolman would run. Here again, that depends on the beat. Some beats are smaller, some are more rural that we go to. So we have a standardized that we know. At the end of the month, each individual shift supervisor also, when he does that vehicle inspection form, he or she also is supposed to look for any irregularities in either the mileage or the fuel consumption itself, and either directly inquire on that or send it on up to us as a possible issue, and then we will look at it and see whether or not it's a special teams person or something like that there's a reason why that they're doing it.
Does that get tracked for the civilian ones as well? I guess I can get my head around, especially the patrol, that they're going to have, the miles that they're going to have, but just making sure that the civilian ones are monitored as well.
Yes, I'm gonna be honest with you, 24 cars out of our 500 to keep up with, they are not huge issues for us. We would see irregularities, and they also have supervisors that are supposed to sign off on their gas report. So they would look for anything anomaly like that.
Is there a reason that there isn't GPS tracking on the largest fleet in Knox County?
Ultimately, I think each administration makes that choice, and that's definitely up to Sheriff Spangler as to how he wants the fleet tracked, and we constantly look at stuff. There's some security issues with police officers that there's not with others, but ultimately the decision is his as to what we go with, and at this point, those two safeguards of the body camera and the other one, he feels like is sufficient for what we need to be doing.
Okay. I mean, ultimately, it's his administration, but it's the taxpayers' assets. So at some point, this is, I think, the balancing act that every finance and audit committee meeting has, committee has, is it's independently elected offices, but using resources from the public. And if everybody else in the building and certain divisions or certain sets of Knox County have to abide by certain policies and procedures, like where are the assets and how are they being driven and that thing, why do other branches or parts of the office
well, here again, along with what GPS we do have, along with the protocols that we've put in place as far as mileage reports and gas consumptions, the sheriff has determined at this time that that's an adequate blanket to ensure that. And our civilian fleet is so minute compared to the other ones out there that run the roads 24/7. It's a very small thing, but here again, it's even easier to pick it up on that level. The patrolman, to be honest with you, you got all these officers that are running from one side of the county to the other. The civilian cars are a more, traditional pattern back and forth to work or to an assignment.
Did you say that the GPS that is in place now is tracked to the person?
It's to if they're an officer, it's the body cam and their phone, but if it's a civilian driver, it's just their county issued phone.
Okay,
So it's not married to the vehicle, but generally, so there could be an issue where they're not with the vehicle moving around, but then that was a gap that we mentioned could be
But
covered.
then they wouldn't be using the vehicle if they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, you assume the best, but that's not what Audit Committee
Right,
does.
but-
We test for the potential, pitfalls or the openings in which somebody could abuse it.
It could be a potential gap. Which
If you have a county vehicle that is being used twice as much as normal, but again, you would find that in reports and anomalies. So just obviously tightening all that up, and I think it's been very helpful to Knox County in a whole, given all that's going on right now, is to not just trust that everybody does the best thing, but to verify that assets of the county and the county taxpayers are being used for county business. And so this may be an opportunity to continue to expand that reassurance to the public that the things that they're investing in are being used for the right reasons.
Any further questions on it?
I think so.
That'll lead us into our second opportunity for improvement. This is regarding CDL drivers, and that CDL drivers should be included in a specific CDL-specific drug testing pool. During our discussion and testing for this audit, we identified 3 individuals within KCSO who hold CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, all of whom work under the Corrections Division. And based on our research into fleet management guidelines from previous audits and our understanding of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration guidelines, CDL drivers are required to be included in a specific pool for random drug testing purposes, a pool consisting solely of CDL drivers. KCSO Corrections currently performs random drug testing of all personnel in order to comply with the federal and state guidelines governing corrections operations. So in effect, these drivers are technically subject to random drug testing. However, there's not currently a dedicated selection pool consisting solely of CDL drivers. So our recommendation is that KCSO either develop a specific drug testing pool consisting solely of CDL drivers, or provide the names of those individuals to Knox County Risk Management for inclusion into their CDL drug testing pool that's currently being maintained. And all this is to more closely comply with the federal regulations regarding CDL drivers.
There's any questions on that?
Pending any further questions, that concludes our audit of KCSO fleet.
Appreciate you guys.
It's very helpful.
I'd just like to say on behalf of the Sheriff's Office, I put it in our response letter. We really appreciate all 4 of these gentlemen. That was a daunting task for both of us, but takes a lot of patience on both sides, but the communication, everything was excellent, because we're basically working from 2 different worlds. But the audit team did a great job, and we appreciate their hard work.
Thank you. Great feedback. Appreciate it. I think we can go ahead and move on to the internal audit update. Is that?
All right. So good afternoon. I'm Zach Fullerton, Internal Audit Director. Commissioner Jackson pointed out we sort of blew through the 15 minutes there, so I'm going to try to speed this along as best I can. If you'll start in your packet on page 1, obviously we closed out the KCSO fleet. Thanks to the Sheriff's Office for their cooperation with that. All of the internal audit initiatives are completed. We updated our internal operating manual. I sent that in the email to you all to match the 2024 generally accepted government auditing standards. Completed our FY26 risk assessment. Of course, that's where we go out and meet with a variety of different county departments, talk through common risk areas, try to develop our FY26 audit plan. So we'll talk about that in just a second. One thing I did want to talk about, the continuous auditing program. So
that's sort of, that is set up. Nathan has spearheaded that over the last month or so. We've got 2 programs that are developed and laid out, and we'll run the first test in July. So the first program is a monthly review of randomly selected county vehicles to look for instances of personal use. Obviously, big topic in the county over the last 6 months or so. We'll be randomly selecting a vehicle for each auditor to review the preceding month's usage. And then obviously if we see any issues, we'll escalate that to a wider investigation. The second module of that is looking at travel expenses. So the way that works, very similar to the vehicles, we'll randomly select an elected official's office or one of the departments in that office, obviously several departments under the mayor. Then we'll look at the highest dollar amount travel expense coded to that department in the preceding period. So, we'll check for compliance with the travel policy, check for reasonable of expenses, GSA rates, things like that. So we'll be doing that monthly, and we'll update you in future meetings on how that's progressing. Ongoing projects, still working on the KCSO payroll audit. I know testing's taking a little bit longer than normal. It's, we
KCS or KCSO?
Did I say KCSO?
Yeah.
KCS.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
2 different roles.
School's payroll audit, yes.
Amber perked up.
Yeah. Excuse me? So in this, we of course, KCS did the compensation study. We're looking to see if they implemented the results of the compensation study correctly. We had a little bit of a unique methodology. We didn't just select, statistical. We actually figured out a way to identify individuals who moved greater than the expected number of pay steps. So what you would think is, okay, if there is a problem, it's going to be in this sample. So doing that, you have to sort of see, okay, they started at a pay step 15, they ended up at a pay step 19. Let's go back and map it out based on school year, which is obviously not fiscal year or calendar year. Did they change positions? Did they bring in outside experience? There's a lot that goes into this. So that's why it's taken a little bit longer. We're at the very end waiting on a few questionable instances for schools to let us know about. They're reviewing. We have found a couple where, 2 to 5, I think as of right now, where the pay was wrong for the individual. KCS has corrected that person, those individuals' pay, and is retro paying them back. So I think in those instances, I'm glad we did this, right? Because now the people's pay is going to be corrected. So anyway, we'll have that report for you at the next meeting. Let's go on to page 2. These are just some general updates. Wanted to welcome Travis Wright, our newest audit committee member, school board, District 8. We had a chance to sit down a couple of weeks ago. I got him up to speed on this committee and all the great things that we get to do. So, he's going to be a great addition to the team. Welcome.
Thank you.
As you remember, we updated the audit committee charter, the county code, commission approved all of that. The charter is on our website now, so you can see it there. That'll be the authoritative copy. Richard and I, as I mentioned, we went to the conference in Minnesota, Association of Local Government Auditors, to get our award for winning the audit award, the Knighton Award for our fleet management audit. That was great. We got to network with the Chattanooga team was there, and the Metro Davidson team, internal audit team was there. So got to meet them for the first time, and that was great. I thought it was really cool. After that, actually, the chief auditor for the Milwaukee public school system reached out to us, and they were asking some questions about our fleet audit because they had seen that it won an award, and they're doing a fleet audit. So Richard met with them and tried to give them some guidance. So I think that just speaks a lot to the work that we're doing when people from elsewhere reach out to us for information. Let's see here. Richard and I were. Chris was nice enough to invite us to the East Tennessee Finance Directors Roundtable. We got to present about internal audits and audit committees, and other counties are obviously represented there. Anderson, Blount County, these larger counties, I think that would really benefit from having an internal audit function. So got to sell the function a little bit and just provide some education. So I thought that was really great. I have to mention Harrison passed his testing to become a certified fraud examiner. So we're really proud of that. Richard passed part 1 of the certified internal auditor exam. So I'm big on continuous education, always push it. just really happy to see the team growing in that way. Also, all these cute pictures. There's no pictures in Ted's report. Maybe we need to change that. I have to mention these really quick. So Richard just had his second child 2 weeks ago. Shyla, is that her?
Shyla,
yeah. There on the left, and then Harrison and his bride-to-be on the far right. They're getting married on July 12th, so that's coming up soon. And then me and my bride-to-be getting married in 12 days. So fun times for the audit team. All right, let's turn on to the proposed audit plan, which is on page 3. Obviously, this plan was born out of the risk assessment process, and then also just things we hear throughout the year that might need a look. And as Ted mentioned, we talk with external audit collaboratively, have a collaborative conversation about potential projects and risk areas. So let me take you through these. First, we'll keep working through the school's payroll. Part 2 will be more traditional payroll testing, ghost employees, disbursements, making sure those are computed using the correct rates and benefit selections. The second one, I'm really excited about this one, is a governance audit. So it's basically an audit to look at all the boards and committees that operate within Knox County government. Look at them in terms of, do they have a written charter or bylaws? Do they abide by those? Do they take minutes? Are they actually performing the oversight functions that they say they are going to do? I think it's really appropriate right now with everything that's transpired at the juvenile detention facility. So, whenever you have one of these that doesn't specify a specific department, where do your findings go? It may end up, this may just be a fact-finding mission for commission to say, hey, these are out there and these aren't operating as well as they could be.
I'd say 95% of all those committees are either born out of or overseen or appointed by commission. So they've probably been commission chair and vice chair, and it's probably the most appropriate.
Okay, sounds good.
Even the mayor's appointments have to go through commission, so it's still, everything's going to funnel through commission at some point. Sure.
Okay. The third one, we're going to look at the school's procurement card program this year. Obviously, procurement cards at schools always gets a lot of attention, has led to some external audit findings in years past. I think what we want to do there is really benchmark their program against the county's program. We'll look for any questionable expenses, obviously, but then also just control improvements that we can suggest. So I expect that'll be a fairly large project, probably launch it in the fall to give us adequate time to get through it. The fourth is a Knox County Finance Capital Asset Audit. You could probably imagine what this was born out of based on just hearing the issue from the fleet audit. But we're going to look at the capital assets. This is actually the first one we're going to start. We're going to sit down with Perry on Wednesday, sort of talk through the capital asset policy, getting the data out of Munis. But we just want to provide some assurance regarding the reliability, accuracy, and completeness of the capital asset list as maintained by Finance.
Does that include every school building, every facility, every road we own?
No, I'd like to scope it down.
We operate.
Yeah, I'd like to scope it just to general county government, and if we see a lot of issues, then we can expand it from there. So I would take schools out, take sheriffs out, just focus on general county.
Why?
Well, it's just.
Don't we want to know if we own one helicopter or two, or 6 county education buildings or 92?
I don't disagree with you. It just, as you know, the 3 entities are so different in the way they operate. We usually like to try to break them apart where we can.
So you're going to start with the general operating, and then if maybe move to each other one?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. On to the next page. Our big audit for this year for the sheriff's office is actually looking at the merit board, doing a performance audit of the merit board. So, recruitment of talent, filling vacancies, it's always a priority for KCSO, always seems to be a little difficult. Applicants are funneled through, the merit board process. So essentially we want to make sure that we aren't losing applicants out to, KPD or ORNL because it's taking us too long to funnel them through that process. So merit board has policies and procedures. We'll test them against those policies and procedures. Then the last audit engagement on the list is for the clerk and master data migration audit. He reached out to us about this project. His office has recently transitioned to a new system, Tensis. He asked us to come in, just provide some assurance that the data migration was done successfully. So looking sort of at records management, did the case files move over correctly? And then also the fee collection side of that, because you think if you have a case that may have been adjudicated, an old case, right, it could have been under a different fee structure than what is set up now. So have to make sure that transitioned correctly. So that's our audits. Control risk evaluations are there, just shorter time scope projects, really just flow charting out these projects or these processes to learn a little bit more. There we have Parks and Recreation payment of umpires and referees. Sort of want to look at how those invoices are created, how we keep record of time worked, how we get payment out to them. KCSO revenue collection for off-duty employment. So this would be like an officer using their KCSO equipment, working a security job, maybe like at a local church. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that. We get to charge and make some revenue off that, we being KCSO. So want to flow chart that process and see what it looks like. And then third would be the Three Ridges Golf Course, their sales tax collections and reporting. There's been some confusion in how that system works for Parks and Rec. So I think if we flow chart it, we can help them understand here's sort of nuts to bolts on how these reports are created and communicated to finance that will be beneficial to them. And then of course our non-audit services, just the things that are sort of standing on our agenda all the time. Fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, of course, we'll keep monitoring that. Always a lot of work there, hoping for a calmer FY26 and FY25 for our sanity, but we'll see. Then we'll do our FY27 risk assessment, bring in our IT external auditors for a project, keep running our continuous auditing program, and then consulting when people reach out. On page 5 is your hotline summary. So since March of 2025, we had 4 new cases. We've closed all 4 of those, so that brings us to a total of 17 over 24-25. Of those 4 new, I think the way it broke down, 1 was investigated and determined that there were no issues present. 1 was investigated and referred out to the KCSO Office of Professional Responsibility. 1 was investigated and ultimately was resolved by the county. And then 1 was provided as a memo to the comptroller's office. So that's sort of how those 4 broke down. And I wanted to mention too, a lot of times we receive complaints or allegations that sort of tie into other current investigations. So that's the sort of things we would lump together. If we receive something that goes along with another case under investigation by us or by the comptroller's office, we don't report that here as a new case. We just include it in our current investigation. So if we want to talk about any of the details of these investigations by our office or the comptroller's office, we have the option to vote to go to executive session at the end of this meeting. Lastly, turn to page 6, you have our recommendation summary. Closed out 6 recommendations since our last meeting, and then of course added the 4 from the KCSO fleet audit. The 6 that we closed out are on pages 7 and 8. I guess I can go through these really quickly. The first one is KCSO non-seized inventory. We had asked them to create some standard operating procedures regarding their inventory. They did do that, had it reviewed by their legal team, sent it over to us. It outlines what we would expect, management responsibilities, accountability, how to add items to the system, how to remove them, doing annual inventory reviews. So we felt comfortable closing that out. Disaster recovery, that was a Knox County IT project that they were working on to create a disaster recovery plan. That is now in place. It goes sort of hand in hand with the continuity of operations plan. Not going to go into details there. Obviously, the IT security is sort of a confidential, exempt from public disclosure conversation. But reviewed the plan. The plan looks good, and if you wanted to see the plan, we could speak offline from the office and take a look at it.
They just tested that, didn't they? With EMS?
Well, I think that was probably the COOP testing.
Oh,
yeah, the continuity of operation. So this is a little bit different, but like I said, it's going hand in hand. The last 4 are all from the original fleet management audit. Probably could have closed these out a long time ago. These were rectified pretty soon after the audit, but you'll remember County Commission, Risk Management brought forward some amendments to County Commission. County Commission approved them. Municipal Code 22 was altered to specify who actually provides vehicles out to county employees. The Commission updated the fleet safety program manual, and then the manual was also updated to require all offices to comply with GPS and take-home requirements. So that includes all elected offices. Obviously, Sheriff's Office is the only exempt office from that. Let's see, the next one there at the bottom of page 7, risk management. This was related to accident documentation. We went down, we looked at the documentation for the last accident that occurred. It was all there. They have a new filing system that should help them keep their documentation current. There hasn't been a need to sort of escalate any issues since updating the fleet policy, so no issues there. Last two on page 8. Let's see. Sending out. Excuse me. Having a comprehensive list of take-home vehicles. So your risk management updated the fleet manual to require departments to submit the take-home form to both Knox County Payroll and the Knox County Fleet Service Center. So payroll is maintaining the list of current take-home vehicles. They add vehicles as they receive new forms, so we feel comfortable with them codifying that process in the manual. The last issue was about routine maintenance reminders. Those reminders are going out. We talked with Philip May at the Fleet Service Center. He showed us some of the emails that he sent out to departments that include a report of vehicles that have upcoming maintenance due dates. And we also noted when we did that review that the current outstanding vehicles that have maintenance due was much lower than during the course of the audit. So that's it for me. I know that was a lot, but happy to answer any questions.
The open recommendations, I know the COOP ones are.
Yeah, I followed
up
up
on the due date.
Sure, I followed up with Jenny Holden a couple of weeks ago. They're just waiting on the final signatures for the COOP plan. As soon as she gets those, she's going to send them over to me. So that'll be, I guess, 7 that have been outstanding for a couple of years. It will close,
including a couple of high-risk ones.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yep.
Any other questions for internal audit? Nope. Thank you. Moving down the agenda, future audit committee meeting planning. Typically we have our 4th meeting somewhere around the front end of the 4th quarter. We have not set a date yet. I know Jim and I were talking about whether there's going to be any changes from the elected commissioners that'll be participating in the audit committee somewhere around that time, but we can
all of
certainly
our terms span.
So everyone will stay consistent.
Yeah, just be conscious of fall break.
Yep. We'll make sure to.
Which is the 6th through the 10th.
What with that? I'll be having a newborn at the back end of September.
So you might want to go for the last week.
I might want to go for the last one of October, yeah. Get a little more sleep.
You're gonna have your own school set there.
That's what it feels like. 3 running around. Any other business to discuss that needs to be added? If not, then I know Zach referenced it in his update from internal audit, but we can vote for a confidential non-public executive session under the applicable Tennessee code. I know there's been the confidential matters under investigation by the comptroller's office, and I believe internal audit was going to provide an update for that if we want to hold that session. There's a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And then with that, we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. But that covers all of our items. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're gonna do it in here in the executive session.
We're going to stay here,
Stay
right?
here. Yeah, that's fine.
I thought we'd just stay here. Yeah.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
But everybody don't have to leave except
Yeah.